At my own graduation dinner, the night I'd spent years clawing my way toward, my mother leaned back in her chair, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, loud enough for the room to freeze, "We wish you were never born." Conversations died. Forks stopped. Even the waiter stepped back like he'd wandered into a crime scene. But instead of breaking like they expected, something in me snapped awake, and what I did next silenced every single person who ever underestimated me. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. By the time my mother told a room full of people she wished I'd never been born, I'd already spent 27 years being treated like I was some kind of clerical error in the family ledger. So, if you really want to understand why that sentence didn't kill me, but woke something up instead, you have to start in the house where I learned my original, unwritten job description. Claire, make yourself useful and invisible at the same time. I grew up in a perfectly normal-looking 2-story colonial in Rochester. The kind of place real estate agents call cozy, and children remember as where everything important happened. Except in my case, everything important happened to my younger sister, Ashley. I was born first, but she arrived glowing. At least that's how my mother tells it, whenever she launches into the story of Ashley for distant relatives or new church friends. She came out smiling, Mom likes to say, hand over her heart. Such a calm baby. We knew she was special. Funny how there's no story like that for me. I was the test run, the practice child, the one they learned on, then quietly downgraded to background character when Ashley showed up, with dimples and big brown eyes and a talent for making adults feel important just by existing near them. School assemblies were my first clue. In elementary school, I'd be the kid called up for perfect attendance, highest reading level science fair ribbons. The applause was polite, quick, almost like people were clapping because the lights told them to. Then, 2 names later, they'd call Ashley for most caring or best helper or some other award with a heart on the certificate, and the room would erupt. Moms would dab their eyes. My mother would practically levitate. "That's my girl," she'd whisper, as if I wasn't sitting right beside her with my own crumpled piece of paper. At home, the script never changed. I'd bring home an A+, and Mom would say, "That's good, Claire," without looking up from stirring the pasta, then launch into a breathless recap of Ashley's latest act of kindness. Helping a neighbor, cheering up a classmate, volunteering for something that came with a photo op. "Ashley's such a big heart," she'd sigh dreamily. "She's going to do something that really matters." Translation, whatever you're doing, Claire. Dad wasn't cruel, just quietly complicit. He'd ask about my grades like he was checking a thermostat, quick glance, nod of approval, move on. But when Ashley mentioned she was thinking about maybe medicine or something with people, he practically started designing her Nobel Prize speech. "Doctors change the world," he'd say. "Real impact, you know." That phrase, real impact, became the family's holy grail. Ashley was destined for it. I was administrative support. You'd think one kid holding down 3 part-time jobs in high school to help pay for her own future might qualify as some kind of impact? Apparently not. When Ashley wanted to focus on AP classes, Mom convinced Dad to cover her car insurance so she wouldn't be distracted from her calling. When I asked for help with community college tuition, Dad folded his arms and said, "If you want it, you'll find a way." Builds character. So I found a way. I pulled espresso shots at 5 a.m., tutored algebra after school, and stocked grocery shelves until midnight. I learned to nap on buses and type essays in the break room with a hairnet still on. My parents never asked how I managed. They just noticed the bursar's office stopped calling their house. Once, at Thanksgiving, Mom actually bragged about it. "Claire's so independent," she told Aunt Marie, smiling like she'd baked something impressive. "She never needs help with anything." I remember thinking, that's because you never offered. But I swallowed it like I always did, along with dry turkey. and the familiar ache of being the sturdy piece of furniture everyone leans on and no one admires. When I got into a solid state school business program, Mom congratulated Ashley first for getting into a pre-med track at a private university that came with scholarships and, of course, a little boost from my parents. "You're both doing so well," she said, but her eyes were on my sister. Just different paths. Different. As in, one path got fully funded and decorated with balloons, and the other came with an invoice and a pat on the head. I kept going anyway. I discovered I liked systems, strategy, fixing problems no one else could see until they broke. While Ashley floated through undergrad on a cloud of, "You're going to save lives," I was grinding through cost-benefit analyses and organizational models, rewriting group projects at 2 a.m. because nobody else cared enough to do them right. And somewhere in that grind, my professors started noticing what my parents never had. One of them pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "You know you're operating at a different level, right? You should be thinking top programs, Stanford, Wharton, that lane." I laughed because it sounded like a joke. My parents already thought I was too ambitious for someone who wasn't a people person, but the seed got planted. I studied for the GMAT in slivers of time between shifts, filled out applications in the corner of the campus library, wrote essays that felt like therapy sessions I wasn't ready to pay for. When the acceptance letter from Stanford's MBA program came, I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My advisor hugged me. My boss at the coffee shop cried. My parents? My mother's first question was, "Won't that be far from Ashley?" Followed quickly by, "Business? Not healthcare or teaching? I just thought you'd do something more meaningful." There it was again. Meaningful, real impact. As if helping companies not collapse and people not lose their jobs somehow didn't count. As if my brain was a cute party trick compared to Ashley's saintly bedside manner. Still, some pathetic, hopeful part of me clung to the fantasy that graduating from Stanford would finally be loud enough to break through their selective hearing. I pictured them flying out for my ceremony, eyes shining, telling distant relatives, "That's our daughter." The way they did for Ashley's white coat photos on Facebook. I wanted one moment, just one, where I wasn't the footnote. So when my manager in Seattle suggested a celebration dinner after graduation, I went big. I booked the private room at Delmonico, the kind of place with a wine list thicker than the Bible and more polished silverware than I own spoons. I paid the non-refundable deposit on my credit card and tried not to think about the number. I told myself this was an investment in family reconciliation, like slapping a corporate label on my feelings would make them easier to justify. I invited the people who'd seen me fight my way here. Professors, classmates, my project lead from the firm that had already extended me an offer, and, because I still believed in miracles, I invited my parents. When Mom texted back, "We'll be there as long as Ashley's shift doesn't run late," I ignored the little punch in the stomach and typed, "Can't wait to see you," with a smiley face I didn't mean. Graduation weekend arrived, wrapped in rain and congratulations. People hugged me, toasted me, introduced me as the Stanford one. For 48 hours, I existed in a world where my effort was visible, measurable, real. But underneath it all, a younger version of me was pacing, waiting to see if this time, please just this once, my parents would meet me where I stood instead of dragging me back to where they felt comfortable. Spoiler, they didn't. And by the time we all sat down at that linen-draped table under the soft gold lights of Delmonico, I should have known better. I really should have. My parents walked into Delmonico the way people walk into a hotel lobby they're convinced they already own. Mom's perfume hit the room before she did, something floral and expensive that always made me feel like I was standing inside someone else's life. Dad gave the space a quick once-over, nodding, like he'd personally designed the lighting fixtures. They didn't smile. They didn't rush toward me. They didn't even look impressed. They just arrived. as if my celebration was simply a venue where they were expected to make an appearance. I greeted them anyway, because that was the role I'd always played, smiling too brightly, hugging too long, hoping for warmth that never came. Mom pulled back first. Her eyes flicked over my dress, my hair, the room. "You didn't need to go overboard like this," she said softly, but in that tone that meant she absolutely believed I had. "Ashley's hospital-thrown banquets half this size," she added, scanning the table settings as if comparing them to whatever imaginary standard my sister had set. Dad just patted my arm and went, "Well, this is nice," the same tone he uses when someone hands him a brochure for a timeshare he'd never buy. My colleagues watched politely, unaware they were witnessing a reunion staged with more frost than affection. When introductions began, it took all of 3 minutes for my mother to reroute the spotlight. "You must be incredibly proud of Claire," my manager said warmly, shaking their hands. Mom smiled, but her voice came coated in something thin and sharp. "We're proud of both our daughters," she said, her tone brightening instantly. Unnaturally, though Ashley is working in the ER now, she's making such a difference. Real impact. She said it pointedly, like she was explaining what actual success looked like. My father chimed in, chuckling as if we were all in on some inside joke. "Claire's always been book smart. Ashley's the one out there saving lives." Conversations paused. Even the waiter froze briefly. I forced a smile, cheeks burning, laughing weakly as if it didn't sting. I'd learned young that the easiest way to survive was to pretend nothing hurt. But inside, something twisted, tightly. The appetizers arrived, truffled bruschetta, scallops, little dishes that cost more than my weekly grocery budget had for years. My colleagues talked with genuine pride about the project I'd led, but every time the attention circled back to me, Mom redirected it. "Ashley just had a patient who Ashley was recognized last month for Ashley's supervisor says she's the most promising." My achievements became background music under the Ashley Symphony. The table watched this dynamic unfold, the way people watch a slow-motion accident, unable to look away, unsure if they should intervene. My manager tried to steer things back. "Claire was instrumental in closing our last contract," he said kindly. Her analysis was the backbone of the whole pitch. Dad speared a piece of steak and said, without looking up, "Yes, she's always been organized. But compared to a doctor," he shrugged lightly, "it's different. One saves lives, one saves paperwork." I felt heat flood my face, shame, anger, something shaking under my ribs. Before I could respond, Mom leaned back in her chair and said loudly enough that the next table turned their heads, "Honestly, Claire, you're so sensitive. Ashley never takes things this seriously." There it was. The sentence she always reached for when she needed to put me back in my place. This time, though, something in the air shifted, like the pressure drop before a storm hits. My manager went still. My professor's smile faltered. Even the waiter, who'd just arrived with the next course, hesitated as if unsure whether to retreat or pretend he hadn't heard. Then Mom laughed, dismissive, waving her hand like she was fanning away my entire personality. And then, as if warming up to something she'd been dying to say, she inhaled, tilted her head, and delivered the line that split the room clean in half. Her voice dropped into a tone that wasn't gentle, wasn't frustrated, wasn't emotional. It was pure contempt wrapped in silk. "Sometimes," she said, smiling sweetly, "I honestly wish you were never born." Air left my lungs all at once. Not in a gasp, not in a sob, just gone. My fork stopped mid-air. Glasses froze mid-pour. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." My mother didn't flinch. She didn't realize what she'd said. Or worse, she did. My father stiffened, but only slightly, as if embarrassed by volume, not content. I sat there, pulse pounding so loudly I could barely hear over it, but my mind was crystal clear. painfully sharp, because in that moment I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life trying not to acknowledge. It didn't matter how hard I worked, how much I achieved, how far I climbed. To them, I would always be the expendable daughter, the one who took things too seriously, the one who didn't shine the right way, the one they could strip down in public because they never believed I'd fight back. My manager's hand hovered near my arm, unsure whether to step in. One of my classmates mouthed, "Say something." My heartbeat slowed, my breath deepened. Something ancient and tired inside me finally cracked open. I pushed my chair back. The sound sliced through the room. Conversation stopped completely. I stood, not shaking, not crying, but absolutely done. And when I lifted my chin, the entire room seemed to lean in, waiting to see what the quiet daughter, finally ready to stop being quiet, would do next. When I walked out of that private room, the air in the hallway felt colder, sharper, almost metallic, like the moment before lightning touches the ground. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step steady, even though my insides were trembling. I didn't know whether I was angry, heartbroken, exhausted, or all of it at once, but I knew I couldn't sit there and give them the satisfaction of watching me shrink. Not anymore. My hands shook only when I reached the restroom door. Inside, the lighting was too bright, the mirror too honest. I stared at my reflection, at the flushed cheeks, the tight jaw, the eyes glossed with a betrayal so familiar it almost felt like an old scar reopening. I turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over my wrists. I thought I'd cry. I always cried. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a single sentence looped in my head over and over, like a heartbeat that was finally waking up. She said she wished I was never born. Not whispered, not muttered in anger, said proudly, publicly, with the same confidence she used when complimenting my sister. And suddenly, every moment of my childhood snapped back into focus, not as isolated hurts, but as a pattern I had been trained to tolerate. The birthdays forgotten until midnight, the achievements brushed aside, the tuition payments quietly deducted from my account, the years of emotional invisibility dressed up as we did our best. I pressed my palms to the sink counter, grounding myself. I wasn't weak. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't imagining it. For the first time, I saw the truth with blinding clarity. My family didn't just undervalue me, they erased me whenever it was convenient. I took a breath, long and steady, a breath that tasted like resolve. When I stepped back into the hallway, the door to the private room cracked open just enough for me to hear whispers. My mother's voice first, sharp, dismissive, completely unbothered. She's always been sensitive. Then my father, sighing, "You shouldn't have said that." And my mother again, "Oh, please, she'll get over it, she always does." Something inside me hardened like cooling steel. No remorse, no embarrassment, no shock that she'd said something so cruel. Just annoyance, that I didn't sit there and swallow it. The decision made itself. I wasn't going back inside. I would not sit at that table ever again. Not as their child, not as their punching bag, not as the invisible one. I reached for my purse on the hosting stand, ready to call a car, when the private room door swung open completely. My manager stepped into the hallway first. His expression was a mix of worry and anger. Not at me, but at what he'd witnessed. "Claire," he said gently, "are you all right?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that in years with sincerity. My throat tightened, but I nodded. "I'm fine." He lowered his voice. "What your mother said, that wasn't normal. You didn't deserve that." Hearing someone else acknowledge it made my chest ache, but it also steadied me. "Thank you," I whispered. "But I need to go." Before he could reply, my mother appeared behind him, eyes flashing with the kind of anger people reserve for children who embarrass them in public. "There you are," she snapped, brushing past my manager as if he were furniture. "Honestly, Claire, the theatrics." I held up a hand. She froze, not out of respect, but shock. I had never interrupted her in my life. Don't, I said, quietly but firmly. She blinked. Don't what? Don't pretend you didn't just say what you said. My father stepped out next, sighing dramatically, pinching the bridge of his nose. Claire, let's not turn this into a scene. You already did, I said. I just walked away from it. My mother scoffed. Oh, spare us, you're overreacting. You always overreact. You said you wished I was never born. The hallway went still. A waiter carrying a tray slowed his steps. Even the hostess behind the counter looked up. My mother's expression didn't soften. It hardened. People say things in the heat of the moment, she said. Don't twist everything to make yourself the victim. You said it calmly, I replied. You said it like you meant it. My father stepped forward. Enough. Apologize to your mother. I laughed. Quiet. Disbelieving. Apologize for what? For storming out, he said. For embarrassing us in front of your colleagues. For making this about you like you always do. There it was, the truth of how they saw me. A burden, a problem, an inconvenience. Not a daughter. Never a daughter. My manager started to say something, but I shook my head slightly. I wanted to speak for myself. This dinner was supposed to be a celebration, I said softly, my attempt to share something with you. But you came here to compare me, to diminish me, to shame me. Their eyes flickered, but not with guilt, just annoyance that I had the nerve to voice it. And I'm done, I said. The words didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. If anything, I felt lighter. My mother crossed her arms. Don't be ridiculous, Claire. You can't just cut off your family. I stepped back, putting distance between us, physically, emotionally, permanently. Watch me. Her mouth parted in disbelief. My father looked furious, but powerless. And for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the one shrinking. They were. I lifted my chin. I'm leaving now. When I walk out of this restaurant, whatever relationship we had ends here. I won't chase you, I won't apologize. And I won't be treated like I don't matter ever again, my mother sputtered. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but I'll regret staying more. Then I turned, pushed open the glass door, and walked into the Seattle night. Rain kissing my face, city lights blurring around me, my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from freedom finally earned. And in that moment, as the cool air wrapped around me, one truth settled deep in my bones. Sometimes the only way to stop being erased is to walk away so completely that you become unforgettable. The night swallowed me whole the moment I stepped outside, but for once, it didn't feel threatening. It felt cleansing. The Seattle rain wasn't violent. It was steady, rhythmic, almost like the city itself was telling me to keep walking, keep breathing, keep choosing myself. I crossed the street without looking back at the restaurant, without checking if my parents were watching me leave. Because it finally hit me, their opinion of my exit mattered less than the quiet rising inside me. I didn't owe them a performance, not anymore. When I reached the end of the block, my phone buzzed again. My manager, texting to make sure I got home safely. I glanced at the screen and kept walking. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. Even someone kind. I needed silence. Not the oppressive silence of childhood where I swallowed every bruise to keep the peace, but the kind I could stretch into, breathe into, grow into. The Uber ride home blurred by. Streetlights streaked across the windows like gold tears. My chest felt tight, not from sadness, but from release, like my lungs were learning how to expand without fear for the first time. When I unlocked my apartment, the quiet hit me hard, not the empty kind, the clean kind. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and sank onto the couch without turning on the lights. Darkness wrapped around me softly. I pressed my palms over my face and whispered one simple truth into the silence. I'm free. The next morning arrived like a slap, bright, sharp, too fast. My head hurt, not from crying, but but from the weight of everything that had finally snapped. I checked my phone and found exactly what I expected. 5 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, 2 voicemails, none of which I listened to, and a single text message that made my lip curl. "You embarrassed us, grow up." That was it. No reflection, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the words she'd thrown at me. Just blame. Always blame. Something steeled inside me. They weren't going to twist this into another episode where I was the ungrateful child. Not this time. I got up, brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and logged into my banking portal. The lifeline they'd used like a leash for years. 3 recurring transfers blinked up at me. Their utilities, their mortgage assistance, Ashley's tuition balance. Things I'd been paying for so long I barely remembered what my own finances looked like without them. My cursor hovered for a single heartbeat. Then, click. Cancel. Cancel, cancel. Each confirmation chimed like a lock turning. Then silence. Not dread, not guilt, not fear, just space. And the realization that for once my money, my life, belonged to me. The day unfolded quietly. I went to work, I kept my head down. My team congratulated me again for passing a major project milestone. My manager pulled me aside, checking in gently, respectfully. I lied and said I was fine because I wasn't ready to explain wounds so old they felt like they belonged to another version of me. But that night, everything shifted again. I came home to a message from an unknown number. "Call us, now." Something cold slid through me, but I didn't respond. I made dinner, curled up on the couch with a blanket, and tried to watch something mindless. But beneath the quiet, my mind kept replaying the moment at the dinner table. The gasp, the silence, the sting of her words. "I wish you were never born." It didn't matter how many hours passed, that sentence stayed sharp. It carved itself into me. But it didn't break me. It clarified me. Around 10 p.m., there was a knock at my door. Not light, not polite, loud, insistent. My heart jolted. I didn't move at first, just stared at the door through the peephole's shadow. Another knock. Then my mother's voice, thin, rehearsed, trembling in a way that didn't feel like sorrow but strategy. "Claire, open the door. We need to talk." Talk. That word again. The same word used every time they wanted to reshape me, guilt me, redirect me back into the daughter-shaped box they preferred. I didn't move. My father's voice followed, low, commanding. "We drove all the way here. Don't make this difficult, as if their cruelty was an inconvenience I was obligated to tolerate." I stayed silent. A third voice cut in, my sister's, Ashley. Of course she was there. Of course they'd brought her, the golden daughter, the one whose mere presence had always been used as leverage. "Claire," she said softly, "please open the door. Mom's really upset." A laugh almost escaped me, sharp, humorless. She's upset? She was upset because I didn't stay long enough for her to humiliate me at dessert? Upset because the audience she wanted walked out? Or upset because for the first time in my life, I didn't take it? My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "We're not leaving. You owe us a conversation." Oh, they always use that word like a weapon, like my existence was a debt. I stepped forward, heart steady, and said through the door, not yelling, not crying, just clear, "I don't owe you anything." Silence. Deep. Heavy. Then my mother's sharp exhale. "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "We didn't drive here for this." "That's not my problem," I replied. My father banged on the door. "Claire, enough." "No," I said. "Enough was last night." Ashley tried again, still playing the peacekeeper. "Can you just let us talk?" And that was when the last thread inside me gave way. Not with rage, not with grief, but with certainty. I unlocked the deadbolt, not to let them in, to end it correctly. I pulled the door open just enough for my face to be visible in the gap. Their expressions flickered, first relief, then irritation when they realized I wasn't stepping aside. I met each of their eyes one by one. My mother's manipulative softness, my father's cold impatience, Ashley's helpless sympathy. Then I spoke softly, steadily, fully. "The night you said you wished I was never born," I said, "you made it clear, so I'm giving you what you wanted." My mother blinked. My father stiffened. Ashley's mouth parted. I continued, "From this point on, consider me exactly as you said, someone who was never born into your family." Their faces drained, shock blooming like cracks in porcelain. Then I closed the door, not slammed, not rushed, just quietly, decisively, finally. And the lock clicked with the calmest sound I'd ever heard. On the other side, their reactions exploded, shouting, pleading, insisting, but none of it pierced me anymore. I walked back to the couch, sat down, and breathed. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. Outside, they eventually left. But inside, something stayed. The truth that once you reclaim yourself, you never go back to who you were. And I wasn't going back. The quiet after they left wasn't peaceful. Not yet. It was thick, charged, the kind of silence that forms right after lightning strikes but before the thunder catches up. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something fiercer. The realization that for the first time in my entire life, I had spoken without shrinking. I had answered without apology. I had stood without bending. I sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath me, listening to the hallway settle. The elevator dinged. Footsteps faded. Then nothing. My apartment held its breath, like the walls were waiting to see if I would collapse or rise. I chose to rise. The next morning greeted me with a headache, the kind that comes from too much clarity too quickly. But even through the fog, I felt something loosened inside me. Something finally unhinged from years of being the quiet, obliging daughter. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes that made me feel grounded, black slacks, a clean blouse, hair pulled back. Not armor, not disguise, just me, unhidden. At the office, people were buzzing. The restructuring project I'd carried was about to hit its final phase, and everyone was scrambling. But when I walked in, heads turned. Not in pity, not in concern, but in acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement, a kind I never received at home. Michael spotted me first, lifting a brow in that casual way he used when he was checking beneath the surface. "Rough night?" he asked gently. "Just a necessary one," I replied. His eyes sharpened with understanding. "Good," he said simply. "Necessary is how people grow." We dove into work. Emails, presentations, logistical meetings, but beneath it all, a strange steadiness thrummed inside me, steady enough that I barely recognized myself. Around noon, while the team stepped out for lunch, I stayed behind to finish a financial model. My phone lit up beside me. Mom. I ignored it, then Dad. Ignored. Ashley. Ignored. 3 voicemails appeared like falling dominoes. I didn't listen to a single one, not because I was petty, because I finally understood that listening was how they pulled me back into their orbit, and I was no longer orbiting. That afternoon, my manager stopped by my desk. "You're presenting tomorrow," he said. "Not the team, you." My breath caught. The final presentation, the one that would determine whether we secured a multi-million-dollar extension, had always been meant for him, not me. "You've done the work," he continued. "You deserve the credit." Something warm spread in my chest. Pride, but the quiet kind, the kind built from effort, not validation. When I left the office that evening, Seattle was glowing under a soft drizzle. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement like broken gold. For the first time in years, I let myself slow down and breathe in the rain. It felt like permission. When I got home, there was a small package at my door. No name, no return address. For a moment, I hesitated, heart thudding with old instincts. Then I opened it. Inside was a small card. 4 words written in my mother's handwriting. Words that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. We need your help. No apology, no acknowledgement, no remorse, just need. Just expectation. Just the same gravitational pull they always use to drag me back. But this time, something in me didn't even flinch. I walked the card straight to the trash. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I didn't ceremoniously destroy it. I simply dropped it in the bin because it no longer had power. Later that night, while cooking pasta in the quiet kitchen, I heard my phone buzz again. Another message, this time from an unknown number. You're making a permanent mistake. Family doesn't forgive this. I stared at the screen. The old me, the Claire who twisted herself into knots to avoid disappointing anyone, would have panicked, would have apologized, even when she didn't know what for. But the woman standing in my kitchen now felt nothing but clarity. Let them say I made a mistake. Let them say they won't forgive me. Forgiveness was never their goal. Control was. And I had finally cut the wires. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the scene at the restaurant, not to reopen the wound, but to measure how far I had stepped beyond it. My mother's face red with irritation, the clatter of silverware, my father's dismissive scoff, and then the sentence that sliced through every version of me I'd tried to be. I wish you were never born. I didn't flinch, remembering it. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel breakable. Instead, I realized something new. That sentence wasn't the start of my pain. It was the end of my permission, the end of pretending, the end of waiting for a kind of love they were never going to give, and the beginning of choosing myself. As I drifted to sleep, I didn't replay their voices. I replayed mine, calm, clear, final. Consider me as if I never existed. If they could disown me emotionally for decades, I could finally return the favor with truth, not cruelty. The next morning, sunlight broke through the blinds in thin, clean lines. I woke up lighter than I had in years. And somewhere deep inside, something whispered, not fear, not regret, just certainty. This was the first chapter of my life where I wasn't the background character in someone else's story. I was finally the main one. The morning of the presentation felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Except for once, I wasn't afraid of falling. I was afraid of being seen, really seen. Not as the daughter who made herself small to keep the peace, not as the background character in Ashley's golden narrative, but as the woman I had become when no one was watching. I dressed with purpose that morning, charcoal blazer, crisp blouse, hair pinned back with the same quiet precision I used to build my entire life. I didn't need confidence to flood through me. I just needed to stop stepping out of my own way. At the office, the air hummed with a quiet tension. Teams huddled in glass conference rooms, laptops flickering with charts and strategy notes. I walked past them feeling different, present, rooted. When I reached the large glass boardroom reserved for the pitch, I paused. Through the wall, I could see the senior partners already seated, flipping through pre-reads. Not one of them knew the storm I'd just crawled out of. Not one knew the weight I'd cut from around my ribs. In that moment, I realized something that shook me gently. My personal life might have fallen apart, but my worth didn't fall with it. Michael leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching me. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, the kind of nod that says, "Don't shrink." It was the most grounding encouragement I had felt in months. We walked in together. For the next 40 minutes, I spoke with clarity I didn't know I possessed. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. Even the partners who typically stared down junior consultants like prey leaned forward, impressed. When I finished, the room fell into a quiet, electric silence. The kind that lives between recognition and respect. Then one partner, the toughest of the group, removed her glasses and said, "This was exceptional. You should lead more client work. You're ready." A single word that unraveled 10 years of being told I wasn't enough. After the meeting, Michael walked beside me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You know," he said, "people who grow up fighting for scraps of approval tend to become the strongest leaders. You just proved that." I swallowed the tightness in my throat, feeling both exposed and understood. By late afternoon, the adrenaline wore off, replaced by a strange and quiet ache. It wasn't sadness. It was the mourning of a version of me that had finally died. The version who waited for her parents to see her. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to Lake Washington. The wind off the water was cold but clean, clearing. I walked along the shore, phone buzzing in my pocket with missed calls I refused to check. A voicemail flashed from Mom, then another from Dad, then Ashley. I ignored all of them. They had spent years speaking over me. Tonight, silence was my form of self-respect. I stood at the water's edge while waves lapped quietly against the shore. The city shimmered across the lake, skyscrapers reflecting the setting sun. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold air scrape out the last remnants of guilt. And that's when the moment hit me. Unexpected, sharp, undeniable. I no longer feared losing them. I feared losing myself if I went back. When I got home, darkness had settled over the building. I microwaved leftover soup, sat cross-legged on the couch, and stared at the quiet apartment. The same apartment that once made me feel lonely now felt like sanctuary. I finally opened my phone, not to respond, but to read the most recent text from my mother. "We expect you at dinner Sunday. Family doesn't fall apart over one emotional moment." I stared at it for a long time. There it was again, the rewrite, the erasing, the minimizing. To her, it wasn't that she told me she wished I was never born. It was that I had the audacity to leave afterward. I placed the phone face down on the table, heart slow and steady. For years, they taught me that love was conditional, that value was comparative, that daughters earned affection and approval through sacrifice. But standing in my apartment, the city lights spilling through the windows like quiet applause, I finally whispered the truth they never taught me. Love should never require disappearing. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of resolve, like something inside me had quietly clicked into place overnight. I brewed coffee, sat on the edge of my bed, and made a decision that would shift the rest of my life. I would no longer play the role they assigned me. Not the fixer, not the forgotten daughter, not the emotional sponge. I was done being the structure that held everyone else up. And deep down, I knew they wouldn't accept that decision quietly. They would fight it. They would twist it. They would try to pull me back into their orbit, because losing the daughter who never pushed back meant losing their easiest source of labor, money, and validation. But I wasn't afraid anymore. For once, my voice felt bigger than their expectations. For once, I didn't shrink. I stood tall in my small kitchen, coffee warming my hands, and said aloud to the empty room, "I choose me." And the silence that followed didn't feel hollow. It felt like freedom. That weekend, I stayed off my phone completely. Not because I was avoiding them, but because I finally understood something that used to terrify me. Peace isn't found in people who only love the version of you that bends. Peace is found in the space you reclaim after you stop bending. Saturday morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen island while I sliced fruit for breakfast. Quiet, slow, uninterrupted. No obligations, no last-minute demands, no emotional emergencies wrapped in parental authority. I stood there, barefoot, hair messy, humming to music I hadn't played in years, and realized, this is what it feels like to inhabit your own life. Around noon, my phone buzzed from the bedroom. I didn't rush. I didn't sprint like the guilty daughter they raised. I finished washing the dishes, dried my hands, and only then walked over to check. 7 missed calls, 3 voicemails. One long text from my mother that began with, "Claire, we're worried," and ended with, "This distance you're creating is hurting the family. The family. Their favorite shield, their favorite weapon. Not once did they say they hurt me. Not once did they mention the words they threw like knives in front of an entire restaurant." Not once did they ask what I needed, only what they were owed. My chest tightened, not with pain this time, but with clarity. So sharp it almost felt like strength forming in real time. I placed the phone face down again. By evening, the rain rolled in, tapping softly at my living room windows. I curled up on the couch with a blanket and a book, letting myself enjoy the kind of slow, quiet night I'd never been allowed growing up. At home, there were always obligations, always expectations, always a version of me I had to perform. Here, there was just me, just quiet, just breath. And then at 9:14 p.m., the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Familiar, precise. The kind of knock that didn't ask permission so much as announce itself. My blood ran cold. I already knew. I stood, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. My parents, of course, standing in the dim hallway like they were visiting their fragile daughter during some emotional episode when they were the ones who tore the floor from beneath me. I didn't open the door, not immediately. I took a slow breath, grounding myself with the truth I'd repeated all week. I am allowed to protect my peace. Then I unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to stand in the doorway. My mother's eyes widened like she expected me to collapse into her arms. My father looked annoyed, like I'd inconvenienced him by not opening fast enough. "Claire," Mom breathed dramatically. "We've been so worried." "You didn't answer our messages," Dad added, as if that alone justified showing up unannounced at night. "I needed space," I said calmly. Mom pressed a hand to her chest. "Space, sweetheart? Families don't take space, we talk. We support each other." "Support?" I repeated, eyebrows lifting. "You told me you wished I wasn't born." Her mouth opened, ready to justify, to minimize, to rewrite. "Claire, you took that out of context. I was upset you embarrassed." "You said it," I cut in. "There's no context where that sentence becomes acceptable." Dad stepped forward, folding his arms. "Your reaction was childish. Running out of the restaurant like that." "I walked out," I corrected. "Because staying would have been abandoning myself," he scoffed. "You always make things dramatic," my mother nodded quickly. "And now you've gone silent for a week. We don't deserve that, Claire. You can't freeze us out because you're sensitive. Sensitive, the same word they'd used my whole life, code for your pain and convenience as us." Something inside me steadied. "Why are you here?" My father swallowed. My mother's eyes flicked away. The truth hovered between us like smoke. They needed something. They always needed something. Mom finally said it. "Ashley's loan for her next rotation didn't go through. She can't continue if she can't pay the balance." There it was, not concern, not remorse, not a single mention of the night they detonated my heart in public. They were here for Ashley. Again. "We thought," Mom continued gently, "you could help. You're doing well, and family takes care of each other." I felt something inside me go quiet. Not numb, not hurt, just finished. "No," I said softly. My mother blinked. "No?" My father stiffened. "Claire, don't start." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm ending a pattern." My mother's voice sharpened like a blade. "You're being cruel." I shook my head. "Cruelty is telling your daughter she shouldn't exist. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival." My father's jaw clenched. "We raised you." "No," I corrected. "You raised Ashley, I raised myself." More silence, heavy, dense, uncertain. They weren't used to this version of me. Steady, unmoved, unwilling to bend. My mother's voice cracked then. "But you're our daughter." "I am," I said softly, "but I'm not your safety net anymore." My father's voice dropped into a warning tone. "You'll regret turning your back on us." I held his gaze, unflinching. "I'm turning my back on dysfunction, not family." My mother's eyes filled, not with empathy but frustration, not grief but disbelief. She truly didn't understand how she'd pushed me here. Maybe she never would. You need to leave, I said quietly, opening the door wider for them to exit. We're not done, my father snapped. I am, I replied. They hesitated. Then, slowly, they stepped out into the hall. Mom turned one last time, expression tight with warning instead of love. Ashley needs you. Don't forget who stood by you your whole life. My voice was steady as I answered. I'm remembering exactly who stood by me, and then I closed the door, firm, final, clean. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't sink to the floor the way I would have years ago. Instead, I walked to the living room, sat down on the couch, pulled the blanket over my lap, and let the quiet settle around me like a soft, deserved victory. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter they molded. I was the woman I chose. And that was enough. For 2 days after I shut that door in their faces, the quiet inside my apartment felt almost unreal, like stepping into a version of my life where the floor finally stopped shifting beneath me. I waited for the guilt to creep in, the old reflex that told me I was heartless if I didn't immediately fix whatever emotional wildfire my parents started. But instead of guilt, peace settled into the walls like it had been waiting for years to finally come home. My mornings felt lighter, my coffee tasted better, even the air seemed easier to inhale. But peace never lasts long in a family where boundaries are treated like betrayal. On Wednesday evening, the sun already gone, the city humming in that soft, tired way it does after rush hour, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I hovered over decline. But some old instinct, the one that used to drag me out of bed to handle emergencies that weren't mine, made me answer. Hello? A woman spoke. Calm, professional, unfamiliar. Good evening. Is this Claire Morgan? My pulse dipped. Yes. I'm calling from Northwest Medical Finance regarding your sister, Ashley. Of course. Of course the universe would try one more time to test the version of me I was becoming. I don't manage Ashley's finances, I said. I understand, the woman replied gently. However, your parents listed you as secondary guarantor for her outstanding program balance. For a second, everything inside me went quiet. Not shocked, just tired in a way that settled deep into my bones. My parents had used my name, my credit, again, without permission, without informing me, without caring what it cost me. A heat rose in my chest, but it wasn't panic. It was clarity. I never signed anything, I said. Yes, she confirmed, we have no documents with your signature, and between you and me, the handwriting didn't match the primary paperwork on file. She hesitated. It looked rushed, like someone filled in your information hoping no one would notice. I wanted to make sure you knew. My hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Fraud. My parents had committed fraud in my name. Not for an emergency, not to save a life, not because they were desperate, but because Ashley had bills due, again, and because, in their minds, I was the family vault, the one they could break into whenever reality caught up to their favoritism. Thank you for telling me, I said, my voice steady. What happens now? I'm removing your name from the account, and I'll be documenting the irregularity. If anything further is needed, we'll contact you directly. Not your parent, I exhaled slowly. Thank you. We ended the call, and I let the phone slip from my hand onto the counter. I stood there in the low kitchen light, staring at nothing, the truth settling over me like a cold wave. They didn't slip my name onto a form. They didn't assume I'd help if needed. They forged my identity because they believed I would never fight back. They were so certain I'd keep playing the part of the understanding daughter that they treated my entire life, my privacy, my stability, my future, like something they could sign away. My phone buzzed again, a text. From my mother, we're coming over. We need to fix this face to face. Another, don't make this dramatic. It's just a misunderstanding. A third, we're 5 minutes away. Open the door. A laugh escaped me, quiet, disbelieving, almost pitying. They truly had no idea that the daughter they were driving toward was not the daughter they'd controlled for 30 years. I turned off the lights, leaned against the kitchen island, and whispered into the stillness, more to myself than anyone else. Come on, then, because this time I wasn't the one who would be afraid. When I finally slept that night, it was the first real sleep I'd had in years, the kind that doesn't come from exhaustion or emotional shutdown, but from clarity. But peace, I would learn, has a strange way of testing you. Not with chaos, but with revelation. It happened 3 days later on a Thursday afternoon, so ordinary it should have meant nothing. I was at the office reviewing a client portfolio when my manager, Thomas, tapped lightly on my doorframe. He moved past. Claire, there's someone here asking for you. My stomach dropped before I even turned around. I knew who it was, not because of logic, but because years of conditioning had trained my body to react before my mind did. And sure enough, when I walked out into the hallway, my younger sister Ashley was standing there, cheeks flushed, hair in a messy bun, eyes a storm I recognized all too well. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Employees walked past, pretending not to listen, but there was no hiding the tension radiating between us. I nodded once and led her to a small lounge room with glass walls and soft lighting. She sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with her hands. I stayed standing. "You're upset," I said. "No," she whispered. "I'm ashamed." That wasn't the word I expected, not from her. Ashley, the golden child, the eternal favorite, the daughter who could do no wrong. She looked up slowly. "I heard what happened at the dinner. I heard what Mom said." Shame rippled across her face. "I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't speak. I didn't need to." She inhaled sharply, like she'd been underwater too long. "I know you won't believe me, but she's always talked to me differently. I never saw that version of her, the version she uses on you, because she didn't need to," I said softly. Her eyes filled instantly, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as the girl who took everything effortlessly, but as someone who had also been shaped, maybe not starved like me, but sculpted, molded, expected to be perfect, flawless, unbreakable. "That internship I lost," she whispered. "It wasn't because of budget cuts. I froze. I made mistakes, real mistakes. They didn't want me back." My breath stilled. "And Mom?" Ashley exhaled shakily. "She told me you'd help. She said you'd step up. She always said you'd step up, because you always do. And when you didn't, her eyes closed. "She said things about you I'd never heard her say before." Something inside me twisted. Not pity, not the old reflex to soothe, but recognition. My mother hadn't just used me. She'd used Ashley too, just differently. I had been the responsible one. Ashley had been the fragile one. 2 roles assigned, never asked for. "That's why I came," Ashley said. "Not for money, not for help, for the truth." She met my eyes. "Why did you walk away? I mean, really?" I sat down across from her, slowly, deliberately. "Because she told me I wasn't wanted," I said, and she meant it. And I realized she'd been meaning it my whole life. Ashley's face collapsed, not dramatically, not loudly, just with quiet devastation. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "I know," I replied. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It wasn't warm either. It was honest. For the first time, after a moment, she pulled a wrinkled slip of paper from her pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it gently. It was a copy of my mother's handwritten budget notes. Expenses she'd been tracking. Ash's tuition, their mortgage, utilities, and at the bottom, in a slanted, hurried script, "Claire will handle this. She always does." Ashley swallowed hard. I saw that list and realized you weren't just the capable daughter. You were the safety net, the backup plan, the scapegoat. And I let it happen. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry. For years, I had imagined apologies from my family, grand confessions, tearful reunions, closure delivered like a gift. But this tiny trembling apology from the sister who never knew she stood on shoulders that were breaking, this felt more real than anything I had imagined. I reached across the table, not to hold her hand, not to comfort, but to anchor the moment. I don't hate you, I said. I never did. She nodded weakly. I don't want us to turn into strangers. We weren't strangers, I corrected gently. We were roles. And I'm done playing mine. She didn't argue. She just nodded again, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Then she asked the question I'd been bracing for. Is there anything I can do? I thought for a long moment, weighing something fragile and dangerous between us. Then I said, you can stop letting Mom speak for you, and you can stop speaking through her. She blinked in shock. I can do that? And you can stop expecting me to fix what she breaks. This time she didn't speak. She just nodded and stood slowly, the weight of decades settling on her shoulders. Thanks for seeing me, she whispered. Thanks for coming, I replied. She hesitated at the door. I love you, Claire, even if you don't believe it. I believed she meant it, and when she left, I realized something important. Love without boundaries is not love. It's leverage. Over the next week, I didn't hear from my parents. But I heard from Ashley, short texts, small check-ins, little fragments of humanity. For once, she wasn't calling to ask for money or intervention or rescue. She was just calling to be a sister. On Thursday afternoon, as I packed up my laptop, my manager stepped into my office. Claire, he said, leadership is considering you for project head on the expansion initiative. My chest tightened. That was the promotion, the one that had always seemed just out of reach, the one I'd almost convinced myself I didn't deserve. If you're interested, he added gently, it's yours. I didn't hesitate. I am. As I walked out of the building that evening, the city lights shimmering across the water, I felt something shift permanently inside me. I had waited my entire life for permission, for acknowledgement, for approval, for someone to say I was enough. But now I knew better. The people who try to shrink you don't get to define you. Not anymore. That night, standing on my balcony, Seattle glowing beneath the clouds, I whispered the sentence I never thought I'd earn the right to say, I choose me. And for the first time, the world didn't feel heavy. It felt possible. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. Nothing. No dramatic confrontations, no tearful voicemails, no long essays from my mother about loyalty or duty or shame. Just silence. At first, it unsettled me. I had spent my whole life reacting to them, anticipating moods, dodging insults, absorbing disappointment like it was my job. When that noise disappeared, my nervous system didn't know what to do with itself. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my phone to light up with a new accusation, a fresh demand. It never came. Instead, life did what it always does when you finally stop holding your breath. It moved forward. Mornings became quieter in the best way. I woke up without dread pressing against my ribs. I made coffee, not as fuel for another emotional marathon, but because I actually enjoyed the ritual. I walked to work and noticed things I'd never seen before. The way the light caught on the windows of the buildings, the smell of the bakery on the corner, the small, ordinary kindnesses between strangers that I used to miss because my mind was stuck replaying every conversation with my parents. I checked my phone less. Not because I was ignoring anyone, but because I no longer felt like my entire sense of self was trapped inside that notification bubble, waiting for my mother's next verdict. The absence of their constant commentary left room for something I'd never actually heard before. My own voice. It started small, like a quiet thought in the back of my mind. You handled that meeting well. You deserved that praise. You're not difficult. You're just done being used. Then it grew louder. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to exist without apologizing for it. Work changed too, but not because the tasks were different. I was different. I stopped over-explaining myself in meetings. I stopped padding my sentences with disclaimers and "I'm not sure, but maybe" at the front and "if that's okay with everyone" at the end. When I put forward an idea, I let it stand on its own legs. When I set a boundary with a client, I didn't backpedal the second someone frowned. Funny thing happened. People respected it. The more I treated my own expertise like it mattered, the more others did too. Shocking, I know. Turns out when you stop acting like you're lucky to be in the room, people start realizing they're lucky to have you. The promotion came through 2 weeks later. Official title, project lead. Unofficial title, the woman who stopped making herself small so other people could feel big. My manager shook my hand with a smile that reached his eyes. "You earned this," he said simply. No guilt, no strings, no debt, just recognition. The kind I'd been chasing my entire life from people who had no intention of ever giving it. One night, after a particularly long day, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and opened the article that had quietly gone semi-viral. Nearly 20,000 shares, hundreds of comments, strangers telling stories that sounded like mine in different fonts with different details. Parents who said the same cutting phrases, siblings turned into weapons, children who became emotional shock absorbers so their families didn't crack under the weight of their own dysfunction. One comment stuck with me. "I thought I was crazy my whole life," someone wrote, "but hearing your story made me realize I wasn't hard to love. I was just around people who refused to do it." I read that line 3 times. Then I whispered it out loud like a little prayer over the life I was building. I wasn't hard to love, I was just in the wrong place. About a month after I told my parents to live as if I never existed, I ran into my aunt in a grocery store. The universe has a sense of humor like that. I almost turned around, but she'd already seen me. "Claire," she said, surprised, then cautious. For the first time ever, she didn't launch into a lecture. She didn't sigh dramatically on my mother's behalf. She just looked tired. "I heard things got rough," she said quietly. "Your parents aren't talking much, just enough to make themselves the heroes." I smirked slightly. "That tracks." She hesitated, then added, "I don't know exactly what happened, but I do know this. You look healthier than I've ever seen you." That sentence landed deeper than she probably intended. Because she was right, I was healthier, not perfect. Not healed in some movie montage way, but steadier, clearer, free. "Thanks," I said, and that was it. I didn't over-explain. I didn't justify. I didn't try to recruit her to my side or dismantle the version of the story my parents were spinning. People will believe whatever makes them most comfortable. I stopped auditioning for understanding I'd never get. Later that night, I found myself back on my balcony, city humming below, air cool against my skin. I thought about my mother's words again. "I wish you were never born." For a long time, that sentence haunted me like a curse. Now it felt more like a confession, not about my worth, but about her limits. She wished I was never born because she didn't know how to control me anymore, because I stopped disappearing on command, because I grew into someone she couldn't mold into a constant apology. Once you see that, it changes everything. You stop asking why wasn't I enough and start asking why did I ever believe their love was the standard. The truth is, some people will only love you as long as you are useful, quiet, and grateful. The moment you stop performing, the moment you say, "No, actually, I deserve better," They'll call you selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. They'll act like you've betrayed them when you're really just finally choosing yourself. That's not betrayal. That's survival. Do I miss having parents the way other people do? Sometimes, especially on the soft days. Holidays, birthdays, nights when the city feels a little too big and my apartment a little too quiet. I miss the idea of them more than the reality, the version where a mom hugs you instead of competing with you. The version where a dad says, "I'm proud of you," without adding, "but your sister," at the end. And here's the brutal truth. I had to grieve that fictional family like a death, not because they were gone, but because they never existed in the first place. What I had instead was a set of people who taught me a different kind of lesson. That blood isn't a free pass to disrespect. That being the strong one doesn't mean you're a bottomless well for everyone else's needs. That being born to someone doesn't automatically mean they earned access to every version of you. I used to think cutting off family was the worst thing a person could do. Now I think refusing to cut off people who repeatedly wound you might be worse. It teaches everyone watching, including your younger self inside you, that you don't actually believe you deserve better. So if you're listening to this and some part of my story feels like a mirror you've been trying not to look into, hear me clearly. You are not selfish for wanting peace. You are not cruel for demanding respect. You are not dramatic for finally saying, "This hurts and I'm done pretending it doesn't." You don't have to wait for your mother to say, "I wish you were never born," to realize you have a right to walk away from places that only celebrate you when you're useful. You get to choose a different life. One where your worth isn't measured in bills paid, crises managed, or roles played to keep the family script intact. You get to build your own script, your own home, your own table, and you get to decide who sits at it. No one else. As for me, I still don't know if my parents will ever call again. Maybe one day they'll show up with something that actually sounds like accountability instead of guilt. Maybe they never will. Either way, I'm okay, because my life no longer pauses around what they do or don't choose. It moves. It grows. It's mine. Maybe I wasn't the daughter they wanted, but I became the woman I needed. And that, at the end of the day, is enough. If any part of this story hit a little too close, if you've ever felt like the invisible one, the backup plan, the emotional punching bag dressed up as the strong child, I want you to drop a comment and tell me, what boundary do you wish you had the courage to set? And if you've already set it, what changed after you did? I read every single one. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more stories that say the quiet part out loud, the ones families like mine try to bury. Because the truth is, sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is refuse to disappear for people who never learned how to see you.